We are. Say it.
Dead? Are we alive or are we dead?
Took us 5 episodes to get that catchphrase, man. Come on.
We are alive.
We're live wires too. Impossible to stop. You. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, yes. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Luca Teller Show featuring Alex Connor McLean. You obviously know what you're here for by this stage. You're well lubricated in this world. We are here to talk about Aristotle, the greatest of all time, ish, is Metaphysics. And we are on episode 7. If you're joining us now, if you have just signed up to this, you are joining halfway through a mighty monolithic series. So go back to episode 1, start from the beginning. I think it was Mary Poppins who said, start from the start, a very good place to start. So in keeping with her flimsy, frolicking spirit, make sure you go to episode 1 or not. You know, if you clicked on this video and the title is just appealing to you because of my crafty strategic SEO design, then stick to this one.
If you were clickbaited, then hang around. But if you literally just stumbled across this, then hey, maybe stumble back to the start and join us from the start, and all of this can flow as it has been flowing for us.
Hitherto, this has been a thoroughly enjoyable series of Bros by the Campfire. And I've been thinking about the fact that we're talking, the fact that we're engaging in a mode or a code of conduct in dialogos, and how it's really more Freudian slip mode of conduct that's proper to philosophy. And I think we're really doing our utmost to uphold that tradition and enjoying that so far quite a bit. And we'll do so until our dying breath. To give a quick recap, this is an episode that we're going to use as an attempt to consolidate a lot of the discussions we've had so far. We both feel like there were some spaces and half spaces that were left underexplored and kind of not being able to give their fair due, maybe because of the nature of the discussion, maybe because of the format in which it's been conducted. But there's always going to be something that's outside the frontier, and we're looking to bring some of that in freely and liberally in this discussion. Some of those things we've pointed out explicitly, some of them have been felt implicitly, but in my list of things that have been somewhat underexplored so far, I would put the critique of metaphysics from us personally and from a 21st century lens, with all of the technological innovations that shape the matrix and the discussion surrounding this grand intergenerational dialogue and war of philosophy differently. Language, right? Language is going to be a key feature in today's discussion. Linguistics as a department overall, and like the kind of rise and fall that it's endured over its lifetime. In the previous 2 episodes, we spoke about Aristotle's. You do the recap properly, but just as a light recap, we were forced to backtrack by Aristotle's positing of certain questions that lie at the base of philosophy. For him, taking 3 steps back so that we can get to ground zero appropriately is the proper mode of approaching metaphysics, and I very much agree with that. But because we're going to be talking a bit about language today, I just wanted to say that a lot of linguistic critiques of metaphysics involve us actually taking 3,000 steps backwards, right? It's not just about the guy doing metaphysics. It's about, is it even possible given the disabling constraints of semantics at times, you know, syntax, semantics, things like the symbols, signs. So what are the outer limits of metaphysics, its possibility, its impossibility? What's perennially hovering around the question of metaphysics is, when does it transgress? Is it when it tries to answer questions on form and structure, i.e. the fundamentally unsayable, the undoable? We'll bring in 20th century thinkers that we both resonate with respectively, and there'll be heaps of dovetailing there, I'm sure, between Baudrillard and Heidegger, Deleuze, whoever comes up. But a central sort of tenet of 20th century thought, the way I understand it so far in my own philosophical education and journey, is thinking about the mediator as being primary and the mediated as being what flows therefrom. What happens when the mediator becomes more important than the mediated, and what does that mean for metaphysics? And one thing I was thinking we could do going forward, we don't have to, but a quote that's really resonated with me that I don't know where it's from, so I'll say it's from Joseph Stalin, that might breathe an undertone into this conversation that might be kind of an undercurrent throughout, is these are passing clouds, I am the sky. So there is nothing there to discuss or dissect. I just want to leave that there hanging, and its interpretation will be the following conversation. Over to you, sir, for the recap.
I have no idea what that means, but it tickles me. And I'm curious because, yeah, it's also a similar. What kind of came up for me is like, don't identify with the boats, identify with the ocean that the boats traverse. And so I think similarly, it's bringing up that idea of identity and death. That was a lovely pre-cap. I'll get us into the recap, and then later on we can actually get into the cap, which is the episode.
I assure you, everything we say is going to be cap.
So good. Yeah, I like your framing on this. It's what's been kind of coming up for us as we go through these episodes is our own sense of original judgment that we want to put into dialogue with these ideas thus far, and with sort of the scope of metaphysics and the legitimacy of it. Aristotle presupposes that we need metaphysics, and I think everyone presupposes a metaphysic, a way the world is, a conception of how the world is. No matter how logical you become, if you want to speak truly about the world, if you want to say anything with meaning, you have to presuppose a metaphysic. The point that I was going to make here is that there's our own original sense of, some critique to this, to actually try and disrupt this picture that we can just go and easily do metaphysics and that we don't need to have any checks to that. I think that's foolhardy, and something that, as you say, going back 3,000 steps, is something that has just been presupposed and taken for granted in a sense. So we do need to track our steps back all that way and put it under the microscope of the modern critique of the skeptics and the logical positivists and those who, the scientific rationalists, all of which have a kind of critique of metaphysical practice and speculative philosophy as it's done and as it has been done. So in some sense, there's a bit of filtration that we need to do here to filter what is, let the substances sink to the bottom of that filtration and find out what is really rich and what we can take going forward in philosophy and in metaphysics, if anything at all, because it's really the whole picture of metaphysics is at stake and is on the table when we get into the critique from Ludwig Wittgenstein in this manner. He really wants to solve and dispose of almost all metaphysics. So really big stakes here. And I think you're right in that what we're bringing forward originally in this episode is partly a critique or a consideration or an existential reality that we must confront in technology and modernity. Another one being not only the things that we're talking about and the meaning they have, but actually language itself and how networks of meaning come to be true or not in the first place. So analyzing the language that we're using itself, and for Wittgenstein, finding how language can be very misleading. And I'd also say another thing to bring in is just the scientific critique of metaphysics, and saying, almost from a practical point of view, that what can metaphysics really give us if science has been able to prove itself over and over again? And do we even need metaphysics to achieve that? So all of that I'm looking forward to unraveling with you, and it will be nice to place that triple along with the ones that we've already established, which is along the lines of faith, identity, relationship. A lot of these are the common themes that have been coming up for us. And really informing part of the spirituality of this discussion. It's informing the community of spirits that have come alive through this dialogue. They're not ones which were preempted. I feel like through our dialectic, we're discovering them. And it's really invigorating and exciting to be with these forms.
Yes, and I notice a transfiguring in the forms of those forms as well as we traipse through them. And there's a real dynamism to the vivification process that we're co-undergoing with these forms that are latent yet very manifest alongside us.
So in our previous episode, in episode 6, we found a conception of the world where endless worlds do lie before you, but suspicious techno-feudal gig economic conditions materialize a revolving door where you can walk round and round and distorting any real contact with reality. To escape this revolving divulge and evolve into one that is ensouled, you have but two options and one choice. You either sign up to Luca's monthly Patreon or join my church. Which way, Western man? Okay, the fun's over. Time for the serious stuff. Yeah, no, it was interesting. Like the spiritual community of these dialogues is one thing that stuck out to me, and something that I wanted to recap from last episode, which is almost the spiritual community forming in this space. The likes of Aristotle, Hegel, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, ourselves, Plato, all are in the mix, and we all are kind of spontaneously.
We're in the mix with those thinkers, eh?
This is the dialectic, like, trust. They're all, here in unique, personalized way. They're here in the ways that we have understood them and how we subjectively approach them. They're limited by us and our understanding, but they are also avenues through which we're exploring parts of the world and growing and learning more. And it's through their presence that we're transforming, and it's through the spirit of the conversation that we are leveling up into new ways of seeing from their perspective and getting real epistemic contact with who they are and what they said and what worldviews they reveal. And I don't think you can get that with like more negative or distorting or Joker like figures. I just don't think you hit the same contact with the real. You don't get a hermeneutics of beauty with other philosophers. So there is a real way in which we have found a collection that at least really rightly resonate with us in our embodiment, in our existential Dasein and place in the world. The series so far has been very generative, and one of these generations has been, as we formed it in the last episode, the golden mean of attachment and detachment. And I think some of like that is just very weighty and holds a lot of, it's very potent, the golden mean of detachment and attachment. Some of the symbols we've been producing to apprehend and explain and be in relationship to that idea is the symbol of the ornament, of the hourglass, of the ashes. And we've been seeing how all of those kind of seem to flow and lucidly sit together, even though they do speak to different figures and schemes. They do also have a sort of connection that runs through them, which is, again, around these core ideas of identity, faith, relationship. And another interesting point that we brought up was around this idea of the basement of metaphysics, as you said it. It's a place where the subject object distinction doesn't hold true. And it's, yeah, really when we are doing metaphysics and we get down to a certain level, almost of where we find this reoccurring limit as far as we want to press our thought and dialogue, we almost come back to this cyclic or rotational nature of something. And I think it's partly, from my perspective, the nature of the world, in that we don't really have clear borders on things when we look at them as they are. We just see they have a more kind of flexible and flowing gradiential wave like distinction between them. And yeah, I think it's partly like the subject object duality breaks down at a certain level, and then we have to do philosophy in that place, which gets a little bit more tricky when there is no way to speak about subject and object and things in the same manner that we have been to get there. We actually need to transcend it and become and speak from a place of non-duality to apprehend it. And that is why in wisdom traditions people can sound crazy, and often it's the jokester is also like the wisest person, or the old shaman is also the crazy one, because they are speaking from a different realm of experience that does have more connection with this non-dual flowing subject and object, primitive material. That doesn't mean that you should listen to everyone that's crazy. But it does show that there's a way in which there's an unspeakability to the truths that they have discovered, and that language presents an impasse to communicate those ideas. We dive deeper into puzzles 5 and 6 of Book Beta. What's more fundamental or required for knowledge? Is it the universal or the particular? And we grounded that out in the example of Newcastle, and we're looking at whether the identity of Newcastle exists kind of discreetly within the particular players, or if it is something that exists in spirit, like in the badge or the club. And yeah, we had a good back and forth on that. It was never my intention to come down on either side of that, because ultimately I see them as both necessary and required for the identity of Newcastle. But it was helpful to juxtapose their different positions and to have a bit of back and forth to tease that out, and to see how there is truth on both sides, and how both sides of seeing the players as fundamental to the club versus seeing the spirit of the club as more fundamental to what Newcastle or a sports team or any object is what we were generalizing to is. It was important to see both of those as being part of it. And what we were doing there was a little bit discussing the ship of Theseus, where if you have an old, formulated by Plutarch in the 1st century, so it's been a paradox that people have been wrestling with for a long time. When you have a ship, and if you replace the sail, it rips, you replace the sail, and then, okay, the bottom of it's gone, is decaying, so you replace the entire hull, and, you gradually replace and change every part of the ship. Then is that ship still the same ship, or is it completely different? It's that kind of question that we are going to look at. And it's that kind of question that often comes up today through bad philosophical questions, when we're asking, is something A or B? And almost like very happily, enjoyingly, in some sense unconsciously knowing that it's AB, that it is a structure of AB and it's not A or B. But we play this game, and I would say, and to bring in some Lacanian psychoanalysis, we enjoy the jouissance of not answering that. We enjoy having this, is it A, is it B? It's A, but then there's this quality, like we never want to solve it because we don't have the enjoyment of trying to answer it. That's one way to look at it. But I think there's also just a bit of philosophical schooling that we could do, and maturation and integration of different realms of experience to come to answer those questions a bit better. We then had a big discussion about technology and how that applies to philosophy and metaphysics today, how it's through technology today that we interface with the world, that we interface with others, even that we think about ourselves. You know, ChatGPT as the therapist of 2026 is like a scary idea, but something that also is, yeah, maybe it's got 25% of your problem. So it is coming to an informational level that is offering a lot. But really that just serves as the example of how now today we have to interface through technology to get to the real world. And if we want to be suspicious of us actually being able to achieve contact with the real world, we're in a situation where there's a little bit of a double-barreled shotgun. It's not only the real world that we don't get, it's the image of the real world that technology puts to us that we don't get. So there's levels and layers of deception and misconception in today, you know, from our starting point. We also had themes of technology as escapism from identity, the idea that we seek an identity so that we don't have to create one. And often going back to science and maths and technology as something stable and real and enduring and metaphysically grounded is something that can house our identity and our own lack so that we don't have to forge it in a very difficult way. And it kind of creates that virtual world where, okay, it is interfacing with reality in a substantial way because through science we have so much more command over the world. But how is it also a spiritual bypass for having us come to terms with the real world as it actually is? How much of it is allowing us to tell a story about the world so that we don't have to confront what is real in the world, which is so much greater than any of the mental schemes that we can create for it. And as we got to that place, we then finished on the Kierkegaardian leap of faith and how that looks to give hope in a techno-feudal society, how faith is requiring ourselves to confront something that seems like an impasse and be within the body to kind of make that leap. We kind of told the story of Batman who's in the pit. He's kind of imprisoned there, and the only way for him to climb the ledges and scale his way outside is to not tie himself to the ledge, but actually to leave himself untied when he makes this jump to try and catch the other ledge. And it's only by having that faith that he was able to make that jump and catch. And yeah, there's also this very fruitful idea that, you know, I've come across from Kierkegaard recently and that I wanted to bring into the discussion was how faith really is necessarily something that takes you to different levels. It's the certain belief of something uncertain and the uncertainty about something certain. Like that is the dialectic of faith, and the fact that faith always has that quality is what makes it absurd to us, and why the structure of reality then just becomes absurd, because the things that we care for and treat as ultimate and fundamental and valuable can also be untied and superfluous and, you know, just vapor that goes before us. So it's an interesting quality, and I think faith is a way for us to sensitize and emotionally attune to that inherent kind of lack or unfinishedness of reality. So that's when within your metaphysics you are necessarily having to bring yourself and your emotions and your history and your existentiality and your language, all of that has to be brought to your metaphysics. And I think that's what we are doing and will continue to do in this episode.
Beautiful synopsis, sir. Yeah, the faith one really irks and ails a lot of people and modern man in general, and seems to be a nice unifier as a tone or a motif of our discussion so far. In terms of launching into this discussion, what would you say is a nice umbrella concept under which we can do that? The ones that really have pervaded well and fruitfully for me have been language, technology, and like critical theory in general, like the mode of the subject that is interested in critique. So yeah, where would you like to start?
I honestly don't mind. I think maybe technology, considering we left off it last time, and that we have some juice to get to in language. So maybe we can, recap on any thoughts that we had from last time, and also any new critique or criticism that you want to bring in, or for me, like these current events that it kind of struck a chord with that I have a few riffs on, but I just spent a good bit of time talking there. So perhaps you want to take us into tech. I'd love to hear from you here.
Yeah, I'll start with a quote from Heidegger's essay on the question concerning technology. He says, "Technology is not equivalent to the essence of technology. Likewise, the essence of technology is by no means anything technological." That preconditionary move is something that is also rampant in these discussions, which is that the precondition is so different to in logic, form, and structure to the conditions that are under the microscope, that they're different worlds, they're inhabiting different worlds altogether. And that's a tie-in between Heidegger and Wittgenstein, I see, is the logical form of language representable? No. Is language representable, or is language a representation of things in the world? Yes. So should the object and the study and the piercing gaze of metaphysics be oriented to the form or the object? And so we're back in that same weird catch-22 of what can be said can't be shown, what can be shown can't be said. Which one should we care more about? If there is in fact a trade-off, which the question and the self-answering question of faith kind of tells us it's both. It's the A-B, right? And this perplexes us for many reasons. There's interesting work being done in information and complexity theory, but in general for us, we struggle with paradox. Paradox is the other elephant in the room always when engaged in any dialectic, not necessarily rhetorical, right? Can we understand that a structural feature of an entity is its incompleteness? Does incompleteness indicate a failing, a defect? And more than that, if you can master the art of hovering in the space of incompleteness, can you also do that for incoherence? Now, I don't know how that ties into technology within the 21st century lens, but those would be some opening thoughts from me.
Yeah, interesting that in your first point, kind of bringing it back to, Wittgenstein, but also some of just the key themes that we have been exploring in Aristotle. I'd perhaps like to go there first, which is the idea and bringing up Heidegger again, old pal. How the essence of technology is not technology, and almost the thing that's really at work when we're interfacing with something like technology isn't technology. There's something beyond it, behind it, which is, part of the reason is just the paradox, the innate nature of things paradoxical. Do you have more to share on that point? I had a few things came off it from me, which is how in like McLuhan's work, the medium is the message, is partly how there's so much that is communicated through the structures that they're communicated through, whether something's on a device screen, or whether you're going into an auditorium and watching a play, or whether you're going to the movies, whether you're just scrolling on your phone. The information that we're receiving is vastly different across each of these. Even if you might be like reading the same play script, or you might be seeing the play, or you might be watching the adapted movie, it's vastly different what we receive, because the medium is very much communicative in that. And I think the way that perception is relationship, we're in a much deeper relationship to the play that's happening, rather than to like the contents of our phone as we, scroll through it. So there's an interesting way in which technology is really saying a lot more than what it actually is presenting to us, through the way we use it.
Totally. And I think both technology and language are in tandem twin evils in some sense to us as the unknowing, unreliable subject. The way in which we digest and ingest is seemingly more fundamental than the content of what we digest and ingest now. And that's kind of the fundament of, the McLuhan quote of the medium is the message. We don't, if you ask a group of 50 people, what is the role or the function of language, they're not going to give you the genealogical answer of its co-development with meta consciousness. They're going to tell you it's a way to communicate, which is like really strange. Is language a method of communication, or is it a way of taxonomizing your own thought? Is it a way in which we systematize that which can only be shown? It's so difficult to even know why we have language, what its true purpose and function is, applicability. In terms of where technology ties in, it's a similar thing where we use technology and language, I want to say, as both as psychotechnologies, because there are very profound ancient civilizations that would use these words, for lack of better terminology, but just so fundamentally differently that what they call introspection is just completely foreign to us. That's not what they meant when they said introspection. There's just so many fundamental misalignments between us and them that even the usage of the word technology and language is so different. One definition that we reductively apply is that technology is simply the application of power to production, right? That's all we mean. Can we extend our choice making? Can we extend or strengthen the lever by which we choice make? Even that itself is rather nuanced, but for most people, technology is anything that makes man's life easier. And they're not wrong, but if that's what we mean, then the necessary second order question is, what do you mean by easier? And why do you want things to be easier? Why do you want things to be hard? You fall into the relativistic trap very quickly, and any answer is kind of just immediately justifiable. A lot of what we're navigating as modern subjects is relativity, right? We have this just death vortex of the last 60 and 70 years of anything goes, and well, that's just your opinion, bro. And a lot of the meaning crisis, as it's experienced by millions and billions, seemingly, is surrounding this topic we keep returning to of how to lead a meaningful life successfully. The other thing I was going to say is the clarification. This is purely Wittgensteinian, but the clarification of the role of philosophy. For a lot of 20th century thinkers, started with Wittgenstein. Philosophy is not similar to language. Are we simply trying to communicate, or are we trying to organize thought? And then if we're organizing thought, how do we then communicate? Not through language, because language is so flawed, impartial, biased, limited, disabling. So what is the role? Like, what is the true role? What is the way in which we're meant to engage and face philosophy, language, and technology? So a 20th century answer to that I really resonate with is that it's not about, both language and philosophy are not about concept, organization, or formation, but clarification. So both philosophy and language are fundamentally interventionary. The famous quote, right? Wittgenstein, my job is to show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. Arguably, the telos of a fly has in it innately the desire to be outside the fly bottle. No one wishes their own imprisonment unless they... Actually, that's not true. There are many, many, many Gnostic death cults. So I don't know. I scratch that. But you could argue with good intuitive sense that the proper mode of being would be to self-preservation would be a cornerstone in that worldview, right? So I wonder if a big part of our project here is simply the reordering of the pieces as we see such, so that the puzzle becomes less obfuscated from ourselves and it's easily solvable. In the case of Wittgenstein, can we simply just reconfigure the grammatical data at hand such that these quote unquote problems just evaporate like the fly flying out of the fly bottle, right? Are there the question is, are there any questions at all? Or are there just language traps? We'll get into that more, I'm sure, quickly. But are there essential problems? Is that what metaphysics is doing, or are there essential illusions? Right? We spoke on a previous episode about the ubiquitousness of optical delusions. Is that all we're doing? Going all the way back to Socrates, right? Is all you're doing self-deception? And imagine the philosopher awestruck by wonder that wasn't self-deceiving. Would he have any problems to begin with? And would the science and the investigation and the interrogation of the individual at vis-a-vis metaphysics even be birthed? Do we need to understand the underlying nature of reality unless we're aching inside? That becomes an existential and Dostoevskian question very quickly. So yeah, what I guess the fly in the room is drawing the bounds of what we actually can talk about, what we actually can investigate, drawing the bounds of sense, and everything outside is unsense or nonsense, and those two are not the same, by the way. But yeah, what is ineffable, and rightly so, what's ineffable and wrongly so, is equally important, right? Like, because when we talk about the fields of knowledge and the perceiving and the perceiver, we have the known in our immediate vicinity, the known unknown, the unknown unknowable, and the rightly ineffable would be the unknown unknowable. We don't even want to know it because, as Carl Jung injuncts, beware of unearned wisdom. Where does psychedelics come into this?
Dude, okay.
Wait, no, hold on.
No. Calm down. You just unloaded. And
ask and you shall receive.
I like how it is in the spirit of Aristotle, where in his book Beta, he does just outline sort of the map of philosophy, the questions that must be asked. And I like how, there is so much springing forth from you and different questions to ask and to answer, and to wonder if we do need to answer them, if at all. So yeah, there was a nice flow going there. And I just wanted to pick up on a few things and maybe zoom out a little bit to maintain some of the higher level of questioning and structure. I'm a Virgo, so need that structure.
The white blonde girl speaks from the reckoning.
There's something really important in that you were drawing out, and it was partly this idea of philosophy not as needing to invent new concepts and have new answers, but really just to find new associations between ideas. And that there's almost, in part of this series, like what we've been doing with the philosophical categorical has been to not just redefine new terms, but like find ones that already exist and fill them with a bit of life again and discover the life that they house. And when we put this one next to this one, is there a magnetic attraction or is there a repulsion? Like, where is the levels of coherence that we can find within our ideas and philosophy and technology and language, such that they do sit together and harmonize better? So it's, opening ourselves to a new world of understanding, but by reinterpreting different concepts as, families and grouping them together. So I think that's been a theme in this series. And when we say things as philosophy as physiology, perception as relationship, technology as identity escapism, philosophy as the hourglass of identity, truth as a subtractive endeavor, we're doing that redefining of terms and that repairing of terms. And I think there's something remarkably original about that. Like, these are maybe quips and there's different flavors to these that people have said previously and we may have picked up on, but there's a real substantial communication and exploration going on here that is revealing a new picture and a new way of doing philosophy that is part of what's making us original. Another thing to pick up on and to just stay with tech for the moment is how even in Marshall McLuhan's work, when we can understand that, technology communicates things to us in a much deeper way than, just its structural functional organization, right? There's so much beyond the eidos of something that gives us something to do, like you pick up a hammer and you start seeing everything as nails. The idea of, the structural functional organization of a hammer, maybe it is it's the function of how I use it and how I can fit with the hammer by using it, that is actually what technology is giving us. It's not just giving us the form and this is what it is. It's giving us a function and a way to use it. And that's giving us a new method of interaction and putting us in our physiology and thereby creating its reality. And I think to build on that, it's not, and think about technology and the medium of technology, not only as the message, but a later book that McLuhan writes is the medium is the massage, and that it's actually through a kind of coercion and nudging and pushing that we are massaged into, different ideologies and beliefs about things. And it's all done through the way that we're communicated, and to give a concrete example about this, and it is going into social media again, but in what ways has social media massaged us into a malaise and a depression and a anxiety of the other, and that's yeah, so tough, and hear about that, and particularly in this moment of growing a bit older and taking these things a bit more seriously, like that does have a lot more emotional weight, apart from just knowing it and being able to point to that, to actually then like really feel it is coming online a bit more for me, and partly triggered by what came out in the news this week of a court ruling of Meta and YouTube being liable for the mental health decline of a teenage girl in America who fell into depression and ultimately was suicidal, and that it was ruled and set precedent that it was some of the technological undercurrents, it was some of the algorithms behind technology that was leading to that. That's a massive turning point in technology and society, and how there is accountability on some of these big tech platforms which have a promise of continuity and community, but really leave us with a discontact and an unoptimal grip on ourselves and on the world.
Terrific, man. You've brought in so many streaks there. I'm so juiced up. I've never had more ideas flowing, more neural pathways open simultaneously. You're completely right. I think with the technology stuff, it's generative, it's birthing a new orientation, and it's actually begetting a completely new function and a modality for human beings altogether. It's the impact of technology cannot be overstated. And sticking in the slightly political and more mainstream public consciousness lens, it's so wacky. The level of I guess lack of assumed responsibility on the part of big tech, and then you get the new woke right bro saying, but buyer beware, who's asking you to use Facebook? It's like, but I can't get a job otherwise, so the kind of traps that have been laid out and set are very easily likened to techno-feudalist societies of the 19th century, which is why I used that term a few episodes ago. And as you say, as you get older, your perspective on these things change, and you start to become, I would say, if I'm putting on my true Nietzsche lens, soft and enervated, and you start to move towards like a moral being, and that's not a compliment. But it's easy to be all gung-ho when you're young and liberal, and it's like, of course, if you own nothing, you have nothing to lose. So tax the rich endlessly, and because you have 50K student loan, bro, of course we can't tax you. And then all of a sudden you have stuff to lose, and you think, wow, maybe I should be a bit more moderate. And you do wonder how much of the political spectrum revolves around nothing but Machiavellian expediency and self-interest, which I don't wonder, I know, but others wonder. Something you said really beautifully, I think accidentally, I don't know if you intended it, was with the family of associations and the web of meaning, the repairings, right? Repairing, but also repairing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you intended that, but both of those are just perfectly tacked.
Gonna say I did. No, it's I mean, yeah, looking at language in that way, sometimes you do find interesting ways that they stitch together, but yeah, I didn't mean that.
But that's how we're perfectly the technological impacts permeate through our substance thinking, right? Going back to Aristotle, because apparently that's what this discussion originated from. But what is the traditional substance thinking mode, right? Things exist, relations emerge from those things. But then what's the 20th century inversion? Things emerge from relations. What's fundamental is those relations, those associations, and then what we intelligibilize, if that's a word, or comprehend as things are actually just unions and compositions or conglomerations of meeting points, right? That's the big move. And that's it's a basic, I guess the intuitive thing to the, I would argue, to the ignoramus or the unwitting subject would be that the intuitive thing is, no, actually things exist as things are what exist, and relations are what's composite, because that's when things meet. But I think, yeah, doing any sort of a piercing study or investigation into the nature of things kind of reveals the immediate opposite. But then it also fuses together at the end in interesting ways. But yeah, the big flip is that the world doesn't consist of things, each having its own substance, each having its own essence. You talked about the eidos of a thing itself not being this concrete thing that you can just put faith in, right? Because you can realistically, what you call faith is only truly faith if it's ungrounded. So there's that angle as well. More recently, we have started to believe that the world consists of states of affairs, right? Another Wittgensteinian term. Certain configurations, or more accurately, he would say permutations, in which they hang together in this field of absolute space. And like, it's crazy, right? Because the things that hang together in this abstract hyperspace aren't things itself when you invoke hyperreality, which is what we were getting at an episode or two ago. When the thing that you think is hanging together with another thing as two simple objects waiting to be composed into a composite whole, or unification, what if those two things aren't things, but they're representations? And what if, because you're talking about screens and the digital and how increasingly our life is entirely subsumed by the virtual, the thing that you're calling a thing is actually just like zeros and ones on a screen. So what are we talking about? Tell me, Alex. A definition of a thing, if we chuck into the garbage what was common knowledge 2,300 years ago, is that the thing isn't something that consists of an essence that we can get to, but the thing fundamentally, ontologically, is an innate capacity to enter relations. That's what makes a thing a thing. If it can't enter meaningful relations and hang together in that hyperspace, we can't call it a thing at all. But it only registers to us as a thing once it hangs meaningfully. So there's a stupid catch-22 there as well.
I don't know why, but it reminds me of some of the ways that technology is talked about, and how, the most advanced technology of a time is often always likened to consciousness and made comparable. And I guess it's just like, the what is the thingness of the zeros and ones and the technology. Like, what is there is, in some sense, what we want to call ourselves. Like, we want to find ourselves in technology, by saying, talking about the hardware and the software of the mind, or talking about the code that's needed to, understand. I'm thinking of Donald Hoffman here, understand our biological programming, and, understand the coding of how we are programmed so that we can escape and get out. And it's really, there's a whole lot of Gnostic ideas that come through there, yeah, we're no better today at doing that. And it partly ties into Jung's idea of technology as man's, humanity's attempt to try and imbue the material with the spiritual, and to infuse the mental to the physical. And we are closer than ever to doing that today, technologically so. But we're doing it at a level where we're infusing the digital with informational, and that's not teaching us rationality, and that's definitely not teaching us wisdom. And so we cannot find and see any real way forward to the ethical questions which are going to be most salient to us in years to come. There's no inherent way forward through that, through methods of science and through the invention of technology. That's something that comes back to us. So I think one of the answers to this problem, and in a way to kind of summarize what we're talking here on technology, is what does the way forward look like? And the way forward inevitably looks like a cultivation of yourself by means of yourself, and not a reliance and outsourcing to technology of what's fundamental to us as humans. It's still finding the arts and our humanities and our purpose and our value in our relationships, and having those be what is first and foremost most important for us, and not letting technology get in the way of that. And I think, and partly what you had remarked on Nietzsche, and of how there can be a kind of innovation to it. Like, to me, my emotional state when I am saddened by technology kind of ripping apart a generation, possibly, is like a more energized want to respond to that. Like, I do have an embodied, like, flight to want to overcome such a significant opponent. And I guess we're talking to and dealing with technology here, and this is a Nietzschean point of view, even though we're not like agreeing with it and saying how great and wonderful it is, we're actually pointing out some of the flaws of it. We are still treating it as like a very worthwhile adversary and problem. Like, we're giving it this time and attention because it is such a significant challenge to us. But the response to that challenge is, for me personally, is to make sure that my family's cyber safe, that they know how to use it properly, and then thinking into like my relationships and evaluating the role that technology is playing in my own screen use and how I'm using the screens, like whether I'm actually using it to study and to connect with you and to do this podcast. That's all technologically mediated. That's how I'm choosing to use it, rather than just as sort of entertainment. And then I also think to like future generations and my kids, and what I'm going to put in place as a parent to ensure that technology doesn't have such a large grip on them. And like, I'm thankful for things like my upbringing was, I was allowed to have 30 minutes of screen time on Friday and on Saturday, and that was it. Outside of that, there was just no screens, like no phones, no TV. And I'm grateful for the lessons in that, because it taught me a certain rationality and a certain wisdom in relation to technology, how to entertain myself, and how to just play with my brothers, and all that. So that's sort of the response I feel ultimately towards this problem of technology. And that is more at the personal level and less at the political and societal and legislative levels. But I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And I think the personal level is the appropriate level by which to start with anything. And I do wonder about, I'm always the kind that is more critical of the subject that complains than the subject matter being complained about. And I feel the exact ditto same way about the person complaining about the overreaching nature of technology and impediment onto their lives. I think they're the exact person who were that not the case, they would still be doing nothing fruitful. And this is turning overly Nietzschean very quickly, but I'll read out something from the Antichrist.
I hear what you're saying. Sorry, and just to kind of feedback that it's almost like that social malaise of tech is so bad for us, like I hate it, but then like not do anything in response, just complaining about it, but also submitting to it in the same time. And that's what Nietzsche found is quite like, just unhealthy.
Yeah, fundamentally unvital. And what's the evidence to say that this exact person wouldn't be doing the exact same thing 400 years ago with the easiest, least resistant form of technology at their disposal? At the time, maybe it wasn't screens, it was, the easy girl at the street corner, hedonistically engaging meaninglessly. But the quote from the Antichrist is, I call an animal, a species, an individual corrupt when it loses its instincts, when it chooses, when it prefers what is injurious to it. So I wonder, like, easy dopamine's there. Who's asking you to take it? And this isn't like a, shut out, like go become Amish or something. Like, do that if you want to. Don't do it if you want to. The point is to live entirely, absolutely instinctively. And how much value is there? This is a very like black pill question, but how much value is there to be placed in someone who cannot even listen to themselves? What remains of them? When does accelerationism ought to come in there and
it's,
weed off the weak?
Yeah, it's like the taking advice from the health minister who is obese would be one of these contradictory and almost upside down, things that are actual in society.
If a passive danger like a screen in the corner of your room is tempting you, like what are you even doing? Is this really that difficult? And if it is, what are the challenges that you think you're going to overcome if this minor one was removed from you?
Agree, but I also think that it is one of the, I think technology here today, because we've come so far to hack our own nervous systems, is harder than it's ever been. So wouldn't today also produce the greatest people in society that it ever has if the challenges are so great and it's so easy to opt out and be consumed and absorbed by digital life?
But I would say the challenges are not so great. We glorify our own self-flagellation and we say, oh, it's never been harder. But what is harder now than before? And there's clear answers to that, but it's just cope.
No, like it's I'm thinking more along the lines of Brave New World. Like it's never been easier to engage in this thing, to buy a phone and to zone out, to doom scroll. Yeah, it's part of like how easy is it to just do that, and entertaining is it to just do that, and even struggling with it myself from time to time, and especially when I'm of low mood. Like I don't want to deal with people and things. I'd rather just like entertain myself and watch little skits and quips, and so I think in that sense it's just a lot easier to develop a negative habit, or one that's ultimately destructive to our health and our vitality, and sucking our dopamine towards this thing rather than like actual movement and advancement in the world. We're simulating our dopamine and confusing ourselves by our lack of achievement.
Yeah, you're completely right. The simulated adversary thing, right? Even video games famously.
I laugh because it's absurd. It is absurd.
Yeah, bro, you say it out loud as a third person to your own life and you think, okay, yeah, I'm also falling prey to this. But video games being the perfect example, right, of something that's just this all encompassing immersive experience that's a complete simulation, but gives you all the relief and the discharge that an AI girlfriend gives you. It's like it's almost the real thing. It is the real thing in veneer. It's not in actuality. Some would say it actually is. Like if it's so close to the real thing, it's even better. But I'm gonna go full Nietzsche mode here and say, because the only thing that he ever retracted was Parts of Birth of Tragedy, his first ever book, on screen now. And the opening line in that, to my memory, I might be paraphrasing, is something like, it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that life justifies itself. And the reason he retracted it is because he puzzled himself with the inversion. He thought, why does life need to justify itself? The question isn't life. The answer is existence, right? The question is not that at all. The fact that you have problems don't need to be resolved. The fact that you're alive is the resolution. So go and do something, and try and do it as petulantly, childishly, impulsively, and vitally as possible. And so much of the malaise, we've used that word a lot, and the general kind of feeling bogged down and this is not going right and that's not going right and the walls are closing in is just to do with your moral framework, like simple moral reevaluations, linguistic clarifications, like in Wittgensteinian theme, can just rid you of that, like, immediately, I think. What do you think about that? In a world dominated by what we call reductively technology, but when we say technology, we mean basically higher amounts of power attributed to higher amounts of things, be they objects or information, be they atoms or bits in the digital world. We feel this sensation of the walls closing in around us. We feel a doom and gloom and a all-around techno-pessimism of our liberties being taken away from us. In general, we feel like freedom and technology are going hand in hand. Then you have the black pill bros, such as myself, I've found out in this episode, who say, just get your act together, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But then there's a moral and an ethical angle to this question, or to this postulation, which is how much responsibility do people, the elites, the proxy word we like to use, the people who are not us so that we can avoid responsibility, hold in our lives? Is there literally a sensation and a justified feeling and sentiment that things are harder now than ever before in terms of remaining vital? If the object and the name of the game is to live an artistic, aesthetic, vital life based fundamentally on creation and not being bogged down by consumption, especially easy dopaministic urge consumptive habits, is it harder now than before ever, or is it easier now than before because opportunities also open up simultaneously with the advent and advance of technology? So I think there's a lot of worth and value in both sides of the argument. I know that I come down on one of them, but what are your thoughts on that, sir?
I'm hearing that it's not only easier to fall victim to technology, it's also easier to leverage technology to be creative and get different pursuits that you want to. Like, it's easier to have the freedom with the technology. And is that kind of what you're presenting?
Yeah, there's a bottlenecking happening with the population.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well. Like, in some sense, it just then becomes a shit test of our humanity. I think we face a lot of these today. ChatGPT is one of them. Like, yeah, technology broadly, COVID even to a degree, things that really like push us and ask us questions of ourselves. It's almost like the Twilight of the Idols, the big kind of opening is like philosophizing with a hammer, and it's not to destroy or tear apart a pristine idol that you've constructed. It's to just go and gently tap on them and to listen to the sound they make, to see if it rings true, or if it's a hollowness, or if it's a thud and it really actually has some weight and depth to it. I think that's what these big shit tests are. That's what these inflection points are for us. They're really, just someone's tapping with a hammer on our values and on ourselves and what we value about ourselves. And I'm speaking passionately here because I care about it.
Are you antagonistic to the litmus test, or to the people that are themselves antagonistic to the litmus test we're undergoing?
Well, I'm not antagonistic to either of them. I'm just saying that is more of the reality of what's happening to us today, and that we need to be able to see that to then make an effective choice based on it, and choose based on what we love and value, and cultivate that so that it grows and it can harbor more depth and solace for us when the going gets tough. I sort of feel like the black pill perspective on it, like just do X, like is a little bit moralistic, and still in this, like, is it A or B? It's A. They're not going to the dichotomy of it's A, B. They're not giving because to realize something is A, B, almost you have to have more acceptance for like the other side too. And if you're playing this game of this is the way forward, and like, you know, in a pretty masculine sense, it's something that disguises itself as ethical. You should do this, when really at its root, it's a bit more of a judgment. It's like, if you're not strong enough, then you'll do that. We here are doing this. So I kind of feel like it's a moralizing sentiment to it. And that's why I wouldn't, you know, reduce myself to such a one-dimensional, two-dimensional view. There's a lot more sort of complexity that I think we can
to play
achieve
devil's advocate there, though, in this highly entrenched game theoretic situation, is there not an inescapability? And can you really come up with something that is a true viable alternative to that hyper-masculine approach for the average layman?
Well, only like half of the world are men. So like what's the same sentiment and answer and response for the feminine perspective as well? And I think like we can distinguish it as feminine and masculine, not just like males and females. That's one thing. And I feel like, yes, it does meet and fit a niche of younger, energized, masculine people to kind of grab onto that. And, you know, almost like the crowd that David Goggins speaks to, and, you know, the crowd that like the Jocko Willinks would speak to, Andrew Tate even speak to, and they, you know, are a bit more like, okay, knuckle down for self-betterment and gonna go forward and, you know, try and embody their drive a bit more.
I just want to add a bit more nuance there. The side I'm just putting the mask on, donning, isn't get on with your life, deal with your problems. It's understand that you don't actually have any problems. I would say it's a more spiritually nuanced perspective, not strongman your way to smashing through a brick wall. Understand that the brick wall you think is in front of you is a feather wall.
Yeah, so it's much more of just like training your attitude to just overcome your pain or angst towards the way things are, and, you know, and see them with nuances to how and what it is, but then with your action you have to just be certain and go forward on it. I think that's coming round to a better point of view. I think we just then need a bit more care and time tending to the picture that we're setting up at the start. And like, that's what we're doing here. We're setting up this picture at the start for like the rest of lives and our life to better make those assertions and, you know, convictions and articles of faith that we hold. So I would say you cannot get to the firm convictedness and faith of something is the case without the care and attention to what the problem is at the start. And I think that's where you'd want to bring in like the feminine and masculine dynamics and seeing the world in different lenses. So I think,
I have a question for you on something we began with, which was ability to sit with, rest with, and deal with paradox as you navigate life and incompleteness and at higher extremes.
And here's the thing too.
Hold on, let me just finish. Incoherence as being a structural feature of a thing or an entity. And I wonder if the A-B move that you're making is a dodging of the question, not you're making, but we're making, because we strongman that by saying that the way I view it, the aesthetic life is to be undertaken in a hybrid, symbiotic approach, synthesizing parts, right? But are we just dodging the question by not picking a freaking side and getting on with it? You know, how much wine can you drink while you're contemplating if you're living in the third world and you need to... That was directed at you.
I could drink so much wine doing that.
Yeah, because you have 3 meals a day and you have a roof over your head, which the majority of the world doesn't. So the complexity is kind of unlocked to you at very high stages of comfort. So I'm just wondering, are there like, you know, material limitations that bog us down from literally sitting down and saying, I'm going to imbibe this philosophy?
Well, I think that when we're talking about paradox, you know, the best way to know it is through pain in some sense, is through turmoil and discomfort. And in the same way that Nietzsche wishes on his best friend like the greatest amount of suffering because it's going to lead to the greatest amount of learning, I think that there is something when we're dealing with paradox, and death and suffering, Leo Tolstoy in the gulags, and a lot of the stories that we have from more, even Wittgenstein himself seemingly wrote the Tractatus when he was in the trenches on the front lines of the war in the First World War. So I think that there is real deepening and resolving of paradox that can be done through pain, and it's not just something of the bourgeois class. It's definitely not something of the bourgeois class. Like, it's almost the revolt against them is the embrace of paradox.
Yeah, it's the descent against autocracy in a sense, right? Nuance.
And there's something more here along what you shared before, and how I feel, to me, in some sense, the black pill attitude, which is, a little bit more charitable. We're giving a bit more charity to it, is that it absolutizes a response to paradox. Right? It finds paradox and says, hey, the world is this certain way. There is no ease here. I'm suffering and I'm, in pain in response to this, but ultimately I could see through that pain and just like break through to the other side. It has to absolutize a response. It has to go, okay, I'm gonna run through the brick wall because that is a feather ball. And it then leaves you like, that's what we're working with here. I feel like it can risk negating the paradox, and not like it risks negating it, and it risks like losing its faith. But if it keeps its faith, it then oscillates around the absurd, and you're in this dialectical mode, which then deepens you. But if you've been in that oscillation, you see both sides, and then you say, okay, this is my one set response, then you lose the ability to stay flexible and lean into your own pain and discomfort and back. And so I think to me, like, having a bit more flexibility would also be helpful with, our situations.
That's a fantastic addendum, man. I think there's always a perennial danger to absolutizing the inabsolute as well, and falling downwards into the dialectic rather than laterally towards the dialectic. And you do, which is where faith comes in. Go on, sir.
Also want to say that no judgment, roles and religions, that is a function that some people should have, to like take an idea, a drive, and to run with it. Whether that's that's totally in sport, right? That's what athletes are doing in some sense, absolutizing a drive, like kind of playing that zero-sum game and just being the best at that. Rowers, it's very one-dimensional and driven, but they are embodying that tendency. And so I think we see that showing up for different people, and different people are better suited to that. But there is a role for others as well, and kind of like, Nietzsche and his spirit, to always stay flexible and in touch with that. And Nietzsche is someone who, again, integrates them both, having this like fortified response, but also being continually open to the new paradoxes and challenges. And Nietzsche is someone who takes those down and down and down and down, and never lets go of the sight of, the strength and the might and the eruption of his self, but also his tenderness and his softness, and him, crying himself to sleep. Like, both of those were with Nietzsche the whole way down. And part of that's the reason why he's such a powerful philosopher.
That's where what I was going to say is that's where faith comes in, is grounding yourself in the ungrounded, as we've spoken before. And this levity feeling, right? You're constantly levitating. Lightness is the first attribute of divinity, as he says. The danger of absolutizing a paradox can be avoided by building the inabsolute in the absolute, and knowing that there's an encoded flexibility or variability that leaves you susceptible to the right things, because you want the Dionysian flood to wipe the dead cells off of you out when we're speaking about identity, but not so much that you can't carry your own ashes, right? Something I was gonna say is just about the idea of narrative, and how much of a role that plays in pain. Right, this is like half a step removed from solipsism, but so much of what we call perception of pain is actually a composite of perception and nociception, like based on studies that have come out in the last 15 years. And the classic example, right? Why, when a child falls over, why does he not feel pain? He grazes his knee. He's like, fuck yeah, I'm a warrior. You know, look at me. I've got a bloody knee and I'm so cool. And that's what Achilles was, right? Like, I remember when he got a bloody knee, and then his mom looks at him and she's like, hey, little Johnny, you're bleeding, you're hurting, and panics. And then he's like, oh no. And then he starts crying. You just wonder what the hell went on there. Why was the pain not this? Why was the cut not the source of the pain and the source of the tears subsequently? But yeah, I mean, basic neuroscience would tell you that you have receptors all over your body, that all they do is indicate stimuli that is harmful potentially. They don't automatically sensationalize that stimuli. So it's very nuanced the way our circuitry works, and that begins to beg the question: how much modulation can an individual exert over himself, and why would you not? This is very transhumanist and techno-futurist, but why would you not want to maximize that? And again, who's the type of person that doesn't want maximum autonomy and modulation over their own circuitry, physio and neurological? But a basic experiment, a basic study like that shows that even something that we call just subjective experience of pain is really a composite of many factors, and that we actually have a higher degree of control over many of those simple constituent beings at the bottom of our body and mind. Just kind of opens you up to the possibility of things that we once thought existed in a dichotomous relationship or in a fundamental trade-off. It's like, do we have to choose this A, B, or can we choose A, B, C, D, E? Right? Can we sit with a paradox that is right now unimaginable? And couldn't that be unlocked through thorough investigation into man as technological being? It really does pulsate the nerves, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I read something last week. Sorry, let me just add one thing. Monks can be burned alive, right? Like, this is common knowledge, but I only came across the study showing this last week. Monks can be burned alive and not feel it. Now, obviously, they're feeling it. Like, they're just not registering that feeling as the feeling you're feeling when you get burned, right? Because you're locked into a certain frequency. And this is why I'm saying this is half a step away from the danger that is solipsism, that doesn't give its due to external alternative variable centers of reality that have equal existence in the manner of a Sonder experience, right? You start to fall into this hero's journey, hyper self-masculine narrative trap of thinking everything is literally of me, about me, or from me. But it does really tickle my fancy that something as fundamental and unanimous as pain can be dubbed an epiphenomena. Like, that's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's fascinating the way pain shows up, and that's something we've been speaking to as well, and almost how it sits there with death. I definitely think that the stories we tell ourselves are real ways to avoid pain, and again to not deepen into the paradox of pain psychologically or physically, but to give ourselves a script to go by to understand that. And it shows up in a lot of ways, and some you can understand better and sympathize with someone struggling with a lot of pain, but others, yeah, definitely seem like there could be better things that they could reach for in dealing with that pain. And it's more than just telling a story, right? It is, like, as you say, almost deepening into it and transcending it in some level, but not an easy road. And it is by definition pain. So if you're voluntarily able to go into pain, then that's showing a lot of you. And I think it is also hence why a lot of people don't voluntarily go into it. And that is ultimately the spiritual journey, right? It's the voluntary confrontation of pain in some sense. But it's also equally, and I would say this, it is also equally the voluntary confrontation of the good, or of beauty, or of love, because that is also very difficult for us. to do that sort of authentically and not get like taken up by it, and not just to take psychedelics and go to a rave and feel like we're one with the universe. Like that's not the voluntarily like taking on authentically love and the good. It's a lot more about coming to the sober recognition of, I would, say God at work in your life, but really just the innate humanity
There's
that
the
there
Jesus,
is.
there's the Jesus smuggling for your church. Sign up,
I
folks. If you're not subscribed, then sign up and subscribe at least to this man's church, or he will come knocking at your house. Sorry, I cut you in a pretty pedantic flow there.
I wanted to return to Nietzsche as a philosopher who is, one of the central axis figures in Western philosophy. He was maybe the last philosopher that just spread worldwide and was known in all continents, and people doing philosophy. He was one of the last really global philosophers that assumed such a position because of the depth that he got to. We now have these like breakouts and siloed sort of traditions within philosophy in a post-Nietzschean world. And Nietzsche was, he was one of certain few philosophers that were these axis figures who brought lasting change to the practice of philosophy. Like certain thinkers that in your philosophy you have to overcome or at least account for, because otherwise you're at their peril and you're limited in a critical way. And like what I'm doing here is I'm going to take us to Wittgenstein ultimately, and I've just found a nice path in doing that. Like Nietzsche really brings to us how he opens the abyss essentially. God is dead. He wants to show that our symbolic structures of meaning and our shared symbolic reference points had started to fragment. It was much less about atheism being on the scene and much more about how shared meaning was becoming impossible and it was becoming nonsensical. And, he's doing other things to open the abyss, but like that's sort of at the core of it, right? It's this confrontation with the lack in truth, and the lack being our own humanity in truth and our own use of truth as a weapon and as a tool to serve ourselves. That is the lack in truth. And so there's very real ways in which Nietzsche has to be contended with to do philosophy today, analytic and continental, but more so continental. Analytic you can kind of get by and do your logic and take kind of the subject out of it. But there was other figures like this as well. Only just before Nietzsche was Hegel, and he sort of historicizes philosophy. And, since Hegel, you can't do philosophy as if you're outside of history. There's always a historical moment and spirit contained in who you are as a subject. That is just the structure of your consciousness. And that's something that has to be accounted. And even before Hegel, Kant, who psychologized philosophy in some ways and say we can never know the thing in itself, only phenomena. So massive figures, and I would put Wittgenstein in this place too, who brought about the linguistic turn of philosophy and launched one of the biggest critiques on metaphysics in the history of philosophy. And he kind of
then turned on himself.
and then turned on himself. He wanted to set up that the limits of language were the limits of our world, and that the language games that we play are definable only insofar as they refer to things in the language game. And when we want to take some of the principles there and apply it to other concepts that were never developed within that organic language game, when we want to apply it to things like time or being or essence, he's saying that it's actually, there is no sensible reference to that. Although it seems like it has semantic content, it doesn't actually connect with a thing. It just denotes it, but it is no reference. Like when we speak to this glass of delicious Pinot Noir, the glass is there, the wine is there, and could do with the top up. But when we talk to things like time, what are we talking about? Is Wittgenstein's point, and he's saying that it is outside of a language game, and we cannot make truthful statements that use it because we're fooling ourselves, and we are buying into this belief that we're talking about something metaphysical and ultimate when really we are just misusing our words.
Totally. Do you
Segue into Wittgenstein and the linguistic.
that's all very very necessary and relevant, man, to what we're saying. It's important to place the historical context, as the philosophers themselves that stand the test of time do. I think something from Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Hegel that's very, very present is that imbuing of the historical sense, for sure. It seems like they're giving us, again, it's philosophy by subtraction. It seems like they're giving us increasingly complexified constraints under which to place the thing that you want to study under the microscope. So it's like simplification through complication almost. And some of those constraints are enabling, like technology, arguably, if we were to steelman it. Some of them are disabling constraints, like technology at its worst. And placing yourself as I guess allowing for historicity fused with technology is kind of where we're at. And we're not going to have time to get into the specific linguistic critiques of Wittgenstein, but I think you set the scene really well for what is to be part 2 of this discussion, it seems.
I'm looking forward to picking this up in part 2 and giving Wittgenstein the attention that he probably deserves. For reference, a large part of what I'll be going by when analyzing the critique that Wittgenstein makes of philosophy is from the book by Gerald Katz, The Metaphysics of Meaning. For those Vivekian bros out there that just got really excited by this book,
all 3 of you.
We're going to be going in on it. It's a book that Viveki frames as being central to understanding our notions of meaning as emerging bottom up and also emanating top down, that we do actually have this ontology that puts us in contact with the real, which is not A or B, but A and B. And for Viveki and his Neoplatonic Zen ontology, the AB is this dialectical correspondence between the emergence and the discrete units of phenomena, the players in the Newcastle team, and the emanation from the top, which, from the Newcastle metaphor again, is the badge or the spirit of the team. This book very lucidly outlines the critique Wittgenstein makes on metaphysical tradition, and repairs it in a way. And whether he actually achieves that or not is still up for debate, like Katz, in a sense, like whether he's able to refute Wittgenstein's critique on theories of meaning by supplanting a new sort of Platonic theory of meaning. That's still up for debate, so it's not exactly settled, and perhaps in the next episode we're going to lay that out and see where people sit with it. So yeah, it's exciting to bring this book to wider attention of people and of this space of philosophy. I think it has a lot to offer. It was incredibly dense, and it's also rewarding for me to do something with the knowledge, because hitherto it's been sort of a little bit dormant, definitely informing like my own perspectives and my own treatment of language in relationship to philosophy. But yeah, it's also something to bring to life a bit more. And I think what Katz is saying in this story is that, again, I touched on it last episode, one of the major fault lines in philosophy exists, and it has metaphysics on one side and logical positivists and Wittgenstein on the other. So essentially you have to choose between Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, and on the other side you have Wittgenstein, Rudolf Carnap. So the choice is yours as to which side you'd prefer. I know, difficult decisions. So let's really suss it out. But no, they do have, like, logical positivists and Wittgenstein do have some pretty substantial claims. And I think it is this filtration of metaphysics that we're going to get from it. And it's going to filter down into, okay, what is left for us as substantial? What can we say about the nature of how things are? How can we treat truth as subjective? Can we grasp essences? Can we understand abstract aspects of reality? And is there an epistemology that we can have of intelligibility? Is that reachable, or does it have to be assumed, or do we have to be in constant skepticism towards how we can have knowledge outside of our linguistic structures and like organic linguistic structures? So all that's to come in the next episode.
But yeah, if you've made it this far, as always, the pleasure is all yours, not mine. Thank you for sticking with us. Now you thank us in the comments. Yep, subscribe, like, do your thing. We'll be here, Bros by the Campfire. We'll be here for many, many more episodes. We're not even halfway through the book. We didn't even talk about the book at hand today, I don't think. In my copy, we are now a firm 15% of the way through. So we'll be here until your grandchildren get old. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
This is the only kind of technology that you should let your grandchildren be on.
Screens are not bad. Screens are not bad. Subscribe. Thank you for watching.